11, man, bringing you some knowledge about goddamn religion. Right now, I just want to get into the topic and talk about, where did religion come from, right? Because a lot of people get lost in the external objective representation that, a lot of these holy books or their religion show them, right? A lot of times we get lost in their religion. A lot of the times we don't sit back and connect the dots because a lot of the times our religion carry dogma that make us believe that we're not supposed to know where these things come from, so we get lost in another man and someone else's objective point of view, right? So when you get into like the first passage in the Bible, for example, right? Because we usually use this as an example, right? Which in the Bible tell you some shit like God created light and God created darkness. Okay, so you gotta also understand what was that, because obviously there was no one there with a camera where God created the universe and was holding a camera recording God, and God said light, camera, action, write down everything I'm doing. Obviously that's not what happened. Mankind is just sitting back, observing stuff, and when mankind observe stuff, they make as above, so below correlations about what that is back when we make text scriptures from these things that we're observing so we can share the shit with people, share the contents, make a calendar about what this shit is, right? So when God says, for example, the light, okay, what does that mean? God created the light and the darkness. Well, when you look at people, we have forms of being objective, and everyone got their form of being subjective. You can look outside of you and see that there is day, that there is night. So these things are connected, and these things have an as above, so below relationship. So in the Bible, when they tell you God created the light, yeah, God created the external, the objective world, what is seen, and God also created the subjective, the internal world, what is not seen, and stuff like that. And that reality exists both as an astronomical observation, and that reality exists both as a psychological observation and shit like that, right? So God created the light, objectivity, the external, and darkness, subjectivity, internal. And then you got, and so if we just take that passage from the Bible alone, just that first passage, right? And then we go to the East, right? The people in the East also observe the same thing, where you get the idea of yin and yang, where you got the simple white circle, day, objectivity, yin, the external world, going in to the dark, the yin, the night realm, the subjectivity, the unseen world, the subconscious shit, right? So you gotta understand the starting point of, because both of them came to the same conclusion by observing something and connecting the dots in their mind just by looking at the natures of, as above so below type of shit, right? So if we have two people coming to the same conclusion just from a different observation, then the only problem become is how that person run and how that person make that decision, make that form, right? Because a lot of religious people fight over how these messages come, but these messages are available for everybody. So let's not sit back and get lost in some shit like, oh, I don't like, oh, but it's supposed to be in Arabic. Oh, but it's supposed to be in English. No, it's not about that. It's just about being able to observe and look at what these natures are and make text, forms, signs, and signals to share the knowledge of these things. Because we're just recording information and shit like that, right? So the scriptures are formed based on observing as above, so below natures, right? And when we talk about natures, we're talking about the stuff that we see around us all the time. We see that people have different natures. Some person might show you their angry nature, some people might show you their loving nature. And these are things that we can write about, and these are things that we experience as well as emanations from these different planetary aspects and stuff like that, right? So when you look at the energy of love that is exuded by mankind, for example, right? Like a mother loves her child and shit like that, right? And when you look at that emanation as far as the space that the sun travels to, that the moon travels to, and stuff like that, right? We start to make these connections from as above, so below type of shit. And we start to make writings about this shit because we can see this shit going on with the nature of people, with animals and shit like that, with the trees around us, with the atmosphere and shit like that, and we can see the shit going on just as far as how the sun travels, how the that's like later on and shit like that, right? Because it depends on how you define love. Love is just an energy itself, right? Um, yeah. So this is just my perspective on it. So these texts are tracking natures, right? Virtues and vices, and you can come up with different words for these things. But at the end of the day, you can see that there's a virtuous person with a higher form of conduct and stuff like that, right? And there's a person who's uh, who's full of vices and shit like that, right? A person that can't control themselves, a person that might get lost to their animalistic nature and not know how to be a higher man by maintaining higher ideas, right? And you see this shit everywhere. Where Buddha was a virtuous person, you can say Jesus was a virtuous person. Shit, you can go. So you can say Muhammad is a virtuous person, depending on your perspective. But everyone just comes to disagreements about this shit. So everyone got their own point of view based on whatever religious practice run that land that you're on, right? We're gonna get to that part later. So these texts are tracking down nature's virtues and vices and stuff like that, right? Spaces and stuff like that we're writing about, to then give that space a word as to categorize and catalog the different forms of light awarenesses that a mind can have an experience around or get lost into, that become a travel for that spirit in a body, that become behaviors and habits, both positive and negatives, aka the character that this person play out, right? So, because you can see when people around you are playing out certain lights, awareness, meaning that look, we all have senses, so we pick up this information from people around us and shit like that, right? Where if someone is angry, aka being passionate and aggressive, you can pick up that energy from them. So, okay, now, there are certain seasons where that energy is more prominent. So, as we experience these things and as we sit back and connect the dots and shit like that, we're going to be able to come up to conclusions about the nature of the world, the nature of God, and shit like that. Because people make God a mind outside of them, but it's really more so like, um, it's really more so just the space that you're observing around you. All that was possible within that space and the natures of that space and stuff like that, right? Real shit. So religions create texts about these lights, about these awarenesses, right? By tracking down the sun and the moon and other orbits and the 360 and shit like that, right? To that basically would be God, or understanding a full space or how to fulfill a possibility from a godly or all possibility space, right? It becomes a half truth when humans get lost in the text objective version of the language aspect of it, not knowing we're all talking about the same shit. We're observing within and without. But see, they get people lost in the objective shit, in the text. That's why you get people like killing each other when it comes to religious war and stuff like that. 'Cause all got a different form, a different practice that they cater to just based upon whatever it is they're observing, right? So you got Muslims practicing extreme discipline, some Saturn type energy, structure, right? And they might not cater, they might only cater to that. So when they see Christians or people in the West and shit like that, right? Where obviously from history, we know these guys went through heavy amounts of war just based on proximity as well, where they each just practice and cater to a different version, right? A different planetary energy and stuff like that, right? And based upon whatever it is that they practice, that's an aspect of God and stuff like that. That's like that's more like a chakra, a wheel that's in motion, something that's natural to nature. They make text, words, signs, and sigils and get lost in that shit. And then when they see someone else practicing a nature of a different space, they get mad at that and they can't come to agreements based upon the words they use to describe those things, based upon how they choose to show those things and stuff like that. Because just for me to show you love, I don't have to make a word about it, right? I can show you a picture. You can see that shit in nature. When the mother is feeding her child, that's like a form of love. That's like a form of nurture and shit like that, right? So it's not about how, it's like how we go about it is our own way. But what we do with it, it's like you just got to know how to do it and not get lost in the what. People get lost in Muslims don't like those pictures. Christians don't like that Muslims are using so many words and shit. Like it's just getting lost in different aspects and different ways of presenting it. But we shouldn't get lost in the presentations of it. We just understand the message of it. Because at the end of the day, that's a synchronicity where God can come to you. But if you don't actually get outside of how you're used to learning, then you're not going to be able to learn from an all possibility space type of shit. So people get lost in this limited space that they know their whole life, and when they see it, someone practicing something from a different perspective, from a different angle, they get all weird about it because they think they got to rule the world, and they think like everyone should be practicing this type of mind, this type of conduct. Where it's like you can see people around you. You got people with so many different types of colors. So what? Everyone needs to be some one type of color. That's how you get like racism and shit like that. Because people keep comparing shit to other shit, and then they're like, oh no, it's not matching. One gotta go. One is from God. One is from the devil. That's like looking at your organs internally and being like, okay, I have a heart. Okay, I have a gut. Nah, I like my heart better. I don't like my gut. They both help the overall system in its fucking sustainability and its fucking operations and shit like that, right? But motherfuckers will get lost and cater to one thing and be like, nah, that's the only thing I want to be. That's the only thing I want to experience and shit like that. But God is always about fucking change too. God is not just about because you were talking about change, right? We know that through age you change. We know that seasons are always changing. Remember that the culture is always changing. Things are always changing. So if you look at these things around you in nature, you start to see that okay, things are not supposed to be like this forever. Things always change. So it's like you see these things outside of you, but people don't learn from that because they're so lost into that limited space of how they're indoctrinated by their religion. Where you gotta understand that it's just a light, it's just an awareness that someone had on their mind, and now they put that in a form in front of you, whether it's in text form, whether in its picture form, whether it's in a music form and shit like that. And it's like people just get lost in the presentation, not understanding what it's backed up and supported by as far as a state of being, as far as an awareness and shit like that, right? That's why a lot of the times people get lost in this left brain logic, left brain lizard repetition, constant repeating and shit like that, right? To memorize something, not knowing that there's an emotional intelligence side of things. And so if you don't know the emotional intelligence side of things, it's like you're not going to be a balanced person. What a lot of these religions have you unbalanced rather than be a balanced person, right? So when these Christians tell you that the only way to God is through Jesus Christ, they're just telling you that that's their example of balance. That's their example of virtue. And every geographical location has a hero version of that shit. Where like, nah, that's my favorite superhero. Where you got Buddha and shit like that. A motherfuckers will kill you if you make fun of that superhero that they got, because that's like their highest form of conduct that I guess those remembrance of, or someone built a religion around, or that person built a religion around themselves and stuff like that. Because people like to self glorify themselves too, right? So that's the thing too, what people do, right? So look, let's not get lost in these things. There's so many different ways to learn about God, no matter what perspective you're in. But you just want to bring balance to those things, because astrology tell you like the meaning and reasonings, the energies behind those things, uh, subjective perspectives of those emanations, those lights, those natures, and shit like that. And astronomy is just tracking the time of those things. For you to even be a religious person and sit back and practice your rituals, your holidays, you got to know what time these things come at. So it's like you need someone that knows how to track time as well. Because it's not like, it's not because you got to keep track of shit. That's important, right? And stuff like that. Whereas like if you're a businessman, you're gonna keep track of your employees and stuff like that. You're gonna keep track of the people in your company. It's only in your best interest at the end of the day. Real shit. Now, a lot of the times, people gotta understand that these are just these guys' trajectory. That's the angle that those guys chose within that particular reality and shit like that, right? For whatever reasons that they chose and stuff like that. Where you see motherfuckers becoming breatharians, you see people becoming monks, you see people becoming like all types of shit. So it's like a trajectory that a spirit chose and shit like that, right? So there's no one way to do things. It's like multiple different ways. It's like multiple different angles that a person can do some shit. But it's like people get lost in other people's angles, other people's ways of doing shit, but they don't never do things in their goddamn way. Um, I think I'm gonna start this conversation because I got lost from what I wrote and shit like that. So basically, God created light, right, in the Bible. So that's a form of objectivity. Yang in the East and shit like that, right? External world. And darkness, subjectivity, the internal world and shit like that, right? So God created light, objectivity, external. Where you gotta understand like the layers behind these things, because these things what do you call it, showcases for like many different levels, through the animal kingdom, through the plant kingdom, to the motherfucking human kingdom, to the point that it manifests through the atmospheric kingdom, where it's like there's like other shit going on there and stuff like that, right? So the scriptures are formed based on observing as above, so below natures, right? Because you see, humans have a nature, right? So it's like we make allegories and we write about those things and how people got out of those natures that were bad for them, or what did they do with those energies and shit like that. So the world in the relationship to ourselves, or ourselves in the relationship to the world, right? Because God is unlimited. It's like there's so many possibilities. There's so many ways for a person to learn something. So real shit. So these texts are tracking natures, virtues, and vices, and making texts, making pictures about those things, just based upon understanding that nature and shit like that, right? To then give that space a word as to categorize. Because think about a virtue and a vice. That's a nature. It's almost like an emanation where you can see someone being that space. If someone is being greedy, you can see them play out that nature. If someone is being angry and aggressive, you can see them play out that nature and stuff like that, right? So we can look at these things as things that we play out, right, as energies and stuff like that. But it depends on how you use that energy, right? It's not what you do; it's how you personally do it. So you could have two angry people, but one angry person might use that energy to manifest like to manifest their purpose, and the other person who's angry can use that energy to motherfucking hurt themselves and hurt a bunch of other people, right? So it's not about the energy itself. The energy is not good or evil, good or bad. It's just how you use these things for yourself. Where in Aries, someone who's a Mars sign, someone who's a Martian sign, you'll see them playing out that nature a lot of the times, right? But it's not what you do, it's how you. So it's not good or bad like religious people get lost in. Like Christians try to say some shit like, "Oh, never be mad, never be sad," and shit like, or whatever like that. You know, it's just a space that you're passing through. There's nothing wrong with it. Sometimes some shit make us depressed for a reason, where we need to be depressed at that particular moment of time to realize, oh shit, you know what? We need to get out of something and shit like that, right? So yeah, shit like that. So yeah, these texts are tracking nature's virtues and vices to then give that space a word as to categorize and catalog the different forms of light and awareness, aka information in written form, that a mind can have an experience around or get lost into, depending on what that observer has chosen and stuff like that, depending on what trajectory they go down upon. So that become a travel for what that spirit in a body that became behaviors and habits, right? Because once you're observing a light or an awareness for long enough, that becomes like behaviors and habits and stuff like that. And a lot of your behavior and habits, it's just shit that's backed up by your natal chart. But I would say your behaviors is like the temperament that you're in and stuff like that. And the habits is like shit that you develop by being lost in nature and shit like that, right? So that is negative or positive, aka someone's character, right? So someone's character is just based upon whatever natures they are into based upon a space, right? So they can get in and out of that, but it just depends on like attachments and shit like that. So if a spirit is too attached to a certain nature, to a certain character, they might not know how to let go of that type of shit. That just might be like that's just their idea of what is right, basically. So religions create these texts about these lights, about these awarenesses, these emanations. So we can see these things on a below level as in like the human kingdom, the animal kingdom. But we also experience these things through seasonal transitions by the atmosphere, by tracking the sun and the moon and these other planetaries and shit like that, right? I don't want to say it's that specific way, just because like there's so many starting points that you can get into and start connecting the dots because these things are just happening simultaneously, right? A lot of the times, the shit that's below is reacting and responding to the shit that's going on as above and shit like that, right? Uh, so yeah, by tracking the sun and the moon and other orbits and shit like that, right? And that's a 360 because when the sun because look, when the Greeks are saying the Alpha and the Omega, they're saying the beginning and the end, right? They're talking about the sun being from in Aries and then coming out of Pisces, where that's not good or bad. That's just a language form of interpretation and shit like that, right? But that's why they call it the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the ending, and that's why they refer to that shit as God, because it's just a cycle, it's a wheel and shit like that, right? And so breaking down the sun and the moon and other orbits in that 360, and that'd be the space. That'd be what they refer to as God, as all things within that space and shit and stuff like that. Or understanding a full space or how to fulfill a possibility and shit like that, right? because we're just accumulating shit. But what you accumulate can be negative or positive and shit like that, right? Depending on what that outcome is and shit like that, right? A lot of the times, people don't sit back and watch the habits that they have or the behaviors that they, cater to and shit like that, that get them lost in an outcome or a possibility. The reason why people manifest possibilities and shit like that, whatever possibility they manifest, is because of whatever space they were in and shit like that. And just religion is just one of those ways that I guess you could say Freemasons and these motherfucking Hebrews or whatever just created to train people's minds and shit like that. Where it's okay, I want you to cater to the program, to the ideology, to the methodology that's being ran on that land. So it's in my favor as a ruler for you to cater to that, because then you'll be more on a cheap, subservient type of level if you don't even understand that a lot of this objective shit just came from some shit that everybody can observe and stuff like that, right? So when they talk about it being the Alpha and Omega, they're just talking about it being Aries to Pisces, where that's a language to track it, but that's just information to understand the transitions that all things as above, so below go through, right? And shit like that. Because we know one day we're gonna have an ending, we're gonna expire. Then we know one day we're gonna get birth and shit like through a mother, because we see that through all of life. We see that through the sun. The sun appear like it died, where the earth feel like it's lifeless in wintertime, where there is less life, less fruit. But when the sun come back to in closeness, that bring out the heat, that bring back the life. You look at your thoughts and feelings. Like, you have thoughts, you give birth to a thought, you can give birth to a feeling, you can have those things, so or you can let go of those things and allow those things to fall off and die. So the same shit that's going on as seasonal transitions is the same shit that we be doing with our mind. But see, it just depends, because when you know what you're doing with your mind, you won't get lost in those animalistic natures and like the 3D dense world and shit like that. You'll be more operating on a lighter, where your frame is lighter, you're not so heavy. Because a lot of this shit that they make you practice, memorize these words, be a good reptilian, be a good repeater and shit like that. Just make you lost into your logic and objectivity. And that's like losing your emotional intelligence, where you're supposed to be able to pick up these emanations that are happening around you. So that's why we have these senses, where you're supposed to be sensitive to the senses and shit like that and pick up what's going on in these natures. So you don't need to pray to God to show you the way if you can pick up the ways of what's going on around you and stuff like that, where you would know if someone is pissed off and angry based upon you picking up that emanation, based upon their habits and behavior. So it's like, because nature teaches itself. A flower grow based upon the programming of that seed. So if you know what seed you're planting in your mind, you know what you're gonna get back, you know what you're gonna grow and shit like that, right? So it's just shit that we see all around us, but we don't know how to observe it. We got lost in someone else's form of tracking it and shit like that, right? So religions just create text objectivity, but that objectivity is always forms of subjectivity and shit like that, right? So by tracking the sun and the moon, these things are just emanating natures based on whatever space that reflect, because that's the light, that's an awareness. And we as humans, coming from an animal nature and stuff like that, we're being privy to further out lights, further out awarenesses. That's why you call someone a far out thinker and shit like that. Because the angle that they're coming from, they were able to create an awareness, a space, aka UFO, that's outside of the limited range of thoughts and feelings that this third dimension is programmed with, right? So people get lost in this world. I don't know how to get out of it and have the matrix system, the beast system, take their energy, because these guys sit back, they know psychology, right? They know if someone looks at discipline as more important, we're going to create a religion about Saturn, aka Islam, right? They know someone that like to love energy, a hippy dippy, is going to be more of a Christian. Well, there's nothing wrong with these things. These are just practices based upon planetary energy. So if you can see what it's backed up and supported by as a practice, you know what space they were in or observing to come up with that. A lot of the times, again, they get, because look, you can see the elite motherfuckers that run the world. They don't practice. They ain't got no love for you. They ain't got no love for you. They got love for what they do, but they ain't got no love for you. So it's like, you know, they just understand this shit and shit like that, right? But yeah, it's like they got like a very powerful system to keep it all tight, to keep it all under control. Where it's like you could see what happened to a motherfucker like, you know, I don't want to say P Diddy as an example. I don't know exactly what he did and shit, but he was like a sacrifice. So it's like you just get sacrificed and shit. It's like real shit. Try to tell a motherfucker like, yo, you can pick up people's natures with your emotional senses. Motherfuckers will be like, bro, what are you talking about? because they're so lost into their logic, left brain, where they're lost into the linguistic, the signs and the symbols that they have been programmed and presented, as education and indoctrination, through and shit like that. So it just gets fucking crazy in this world and shit like that. So yeah, because you gotta remember, we're humans basically are basically animals, not as in like physically, as in mentally, where people don't know how to handle their emotions. That's why a person might be in the emanation or the energy of anger, but they might misdirect it. And like Mike Tyson, for example, Mike Tyson ate off a motherfucking ear when he was boxing, or bit that shit off. So Mike Tyson was channeling his anger. Whether that was good or bad, that was just an energy that he was in. But if I don't know what's going on through his mind, right? Because I'm not telling you it's good or bad. It's just a motherfucker using access to an energy, root chakra type shit, right? To create a possibility, circumstance, situation, and shit like that, right? But that's a space that he was in as a spirit and shit like that, right? So a lot of the times, like I said, people get lost into their internal energy. Some motherfuckers that get lost in their feelings and shit like that. They makes their heart too open, get their heart broken and shit like that, right? Where a motherfucker didn't know how to control their emotions, forgot to have boundaries. Like we say these words for a reason, right? So when you look as above, it's like these atmospheres almost create forms of boundaries that tell you that we are all spaces, as above, so below. You would look at that as your aura, your energy, your awareness, which is your vortex of how you manifest your external reality, objectivity, which you're going through as circumstances and situations, right? Like you gotta know that all this shit is the same. So when you see the sun moving into the space of let's just say like Leo, where it's at its highest before it falls, as from an astronomical perspective and shit like that, right? That's like giving off passion, giving off what's it called? Being on the stage, where it's a space, it's literally a character where people play that as below. Oh, I'm the main character and shit like that. So it's literally an awareness before we even play it out on the third dimension. Like this shit is fucking wild, man. Real fucking shit. So, anyways, I want to get back to the writing because I've been going off on rants and shit, right? So we're humans, spirits that are basically have many colors or got lost into color without knowing that they're just a spirit, nothingness, right? Are basically animals. So we're training our thoughts and feelings to be of a higher nature. So don't let these things run your life. You're supposed to understand that your thoughts and feelings are your bitches, where these are lights, waves, things that are passing in and out. So when you know how to manage these things and not let these things manage you, aka you let your nature overtake you, you might get lost in it, catch a STD, fuck the wrong person, all types of shit. But the person that had, that's what the Bible tell you, a man with self-control will take the whole city. Because let's say, for example, if you're a stock trader, if you have self-control, you don't get lost in fear, you don't get lost in stress, you're able to probably produce more prominent results in the long run and shit like that. Because it's about a nature that you're applying, that you're using to manifest in your life. So a person that get lost in fear might do something really stupid and lose a bunch of shit, right? Act based on fear. That's never a good idea. That's why they say, yo, be a rational person, right? Don't be too emotional. Don't be too logical. Be balanced. Bring these things together, right? And shit like that. Yeah. So yeah. So that's the thing, right? So when humans are animals, humans are basically animals, aka spirits, in a space that mimics animalistic nature, because we're coming from that animal kingdom type of shit, right? Learning about higher natures, virtues. So going from vices to virtues, aka transmuting. So a lot of the times people follow their favorite prophet because that person transmuted their lower nature into a higher nature, or that would be the example on that geographical location. So that'd be the person that people follow. But you just gotta look at the practice they did, and you can do that for yourself, and you can be that person down here on earth. Because it's shit that we're all doing, not just one person. Everyone has access to God. Everyone has access to all possibilities and stuff like that. To the point that you can see that there's every type of person on this. Cannibals. There's like all types of shit. So it's like I'm not saying do that. What I'm saying is just this is just all possibilities, not right or wrong. Whatever space that you are in, you're gonna be dealing with the right and wrong in that. Like if you're famous, there's certain levels of things that you're dealing with. Where's like a new level, new devil. So whatever space you're going through, that's the shit that you're gonna be dealing with. So it's not good or bad like religious people say it. Like, it's not like that. It's just more so knowing what you're doing with this energy and what come with it type of shit. And what come from like, go into a higher space, etc., etc. right? So by being privy to these lights, awarenesses, emanations, because these things are coming from outside of this realm and shit like that, right? Sixth dimension and shit like that, right? From these planetary orbits that give us access to these energies to build up our mind for positive or negative. Because when a transition happens, it doesn't necessarily have to be positive. It's not necessarily negative. It just depends on what that person accumulated, and then when that thing gets triggered, when that planet goes into that particular sign and shit like that, that particular energy, it might have a person act out something that they accumulated that was negative and stuff like that. So you can go throughout your day, see someone having a bad day based on what they accumulated. And you can be having a good day based upon what you accumulated. Because it's about the mind and stuff like that. Where it's like the light that you put in your mind and body, what you're observing, what you hold on, that will take you to places. Like a person that overly love other people and doesn't watch out for other people's desires and intentions will manifest themselves being in certain situations and shit like that, right? So you gotta be like smart with that and not get lost in these natures. Use these natures. These are like stepping stones, ladders, and shit like that, right? Yeah. So depending on what that spirit accumulates, like I said, as an awareness, be it animalistic or angelic. So it's literally up to a person sometimes to just figure out why they're into what they're into. So it's like don't get lost even in other people's minds. Because remember, people are a vortex. People are when you're hanging out with someone, they're taking you somewhere mentally and physically. So if you see someone, because the reason why people end up in jail is because they're the shit that they're lost into mentally. However, they built their minds, whatever it is that they hold on to as a light, as an awareness. Because people hold on to like traumas, negativities from their past and stuff. And if you hold on to that, you're gonna induce that chemical effect, bringing that past to the present, and you're gonna start to do that shit in your external reality as if it's real. So a person can get abused at an early age, but they can bring that abuse with them and shit like that. Because like religion just show you like almost newness. Because when you see spring and summertime, that's like nature bringing in new times, where it's like it's the same. Look at the fruits, vegetables as new thoughts and feelings, new natures. So at that time, you're supposed to bring in new natures and stuff like that, acting as above, so below. Because this is the shit that's being emanated. That's the energy that's going on around us. So it's like life has a rhythm and shit like that, right? So it's like when you understand that, you could do it. You can just what you're doing. You're not lost in the religion. You're not lost in the objective shit. The signs and sigils, the building that they show you, the mosque, the church. Now you know how to build a mosque. Now you know how to build a church. Now you know how to create a Bible. Now you know how to make a Quran. This shit is not like taboo. It is not evil. A person make it evil by giving their power away and saying, I'm less capable. Nah, I don't know how. That's blasphemy. God never said that. That's what you said. That's what a person believed on their mind. So they started giving their power away to something outside of them. But they had that power this whole time, right? And shit like that. So to track these planetaries in orbits, right, as above, so below, because you see these natures, these energies happening as above, so below you. So listen, for example, anger and aggression, Mars. That's the planet of Mars. So you can that's an observation as above as well, right? So these are natures as above, so below. To track these planetaries in orbits or the natures as below is to understand a cycle. God, 360, fulfilling a space and stuff like that, right? Or the nature of that space that's being emanated at that particular time by the animal kingdom, by the human kingdom, because it's a light, it's an awareness, or by the animal kingdom, the human kingdom, etc. Right? So on the applications of these lights, awarenesses from the observer's standpoint and shit like that, right? So it's up to you to apply these things, but how you do it is going to manifest some shit. So it's up to you, right? Now based on these natures, emanations, seasonal transitions, tracking the sun, moon, we make signs, sigils, glyphs that become words. That's why the Greeks are saying alpha, the beginning, spring season, Aries, shit like that. That's what they're making signs and sigils about. It's about a space, not about us learning a man's language but not knowing where it came from, type of shit, right? About that specific light and awareness. Even the letter A, the letter one, is about like individuality, and that's some like esoteric shit, right? Because the sun is your actions and viewpoints in astrology. If you look at the signs that have the sun in them, they act very individualistic. Aries acts very individualistic. Leo acts very individualistic and shit like that. So these are forms of math too. But it's a language that we use to understand life as above, so below. And the possibilities from this shit is endless because at the end of the day, That's how you make inspired music and like a bunch of shit. Or whatever light that's going on inside of you, that's what you're gonna be inspired by. So a sad person would make a song about being sad, right? But let's say that person get out of that sadness, they would make a song about how they got out of that sadness. So whatever travel, whatever text, whatever form, picture, and music that someone make is about their travel all the time. So when you look at these religious books, understand that you're reading about someone else's travel on their mind that they did physically, and now they're telling you about it. That's their testimony. You can see a person having a testimony every day, like, "Yo, I quit crack yesterday," and he was not yesterday because you can't quit crack yesterday, obviously, because it takes time and energy, right? As much as time and energy you put into something, and time, you have to put as much as time and energy to get out of it. Because whatever you put in is what you get out, and shit like that. Where these are literally like universal laws and stuff like that. So from observing these things, astronomy, astrology, nature's as above, so below, you start to fucking see the shit going on all around you, where you can't even escape it. Other than like, but that's the thing, right? Religious people get into like spookism and shit like that, where they start to when they start to like think, oh, demons are real, like someone showed them a picture of something with horns, oh, that's chasing you. No, that's just the shit that's going on inside of you, and people just get lost in that objectivity that someone else showed them. No, it's not spookism. This shit is shit that we all do every day. Like, just because a motherfucker got angry, we supposed to get spooky about that? Be like, oh, this motherfucker got possessed by Satan. In psychology, we just refer to it as anger. So it's like, let's just take the bias out of it and look at these things as what they are, energies that people are in. And the better we know how what to do with these energies and build God's kingdom on earth based upon building that shit on our mind and shit like that, we can just have a better life, right? But these Masons, these goddamn people, they don't tell you what these energy, what these what they're talking about in these books. In fact, when you talk about Adam and Eve, you're just talking about like a particular spell. Shout out to Donald the Power Man because he was talking about it. Shout out to Uriel. He was talking about how Adam and Eve is a particular spell that they got people lost in. And watch, I'm gonna show you what I mean. Where Adam, people think Adam is an objective man walking outside a long time ago. Adam is a particular thought that people have. Eve is a particular feeling that people have. Now look what happened at the Garden of Eden. Eve, the feeling, was talking to the thought about what when the snake talked to Eve, which the snake represented desire, right? A snake represented desire that men have internally. So when Eve was talking to the snake, aka a person within themselves, let their feelings get persuaded by their internal desire, right? And they make the thought, the logic make sense out of it to the point that a person can overeat based upon their emotions. They had a desire they couldn't manage and shit like that, to the point that a person get their legs amputated. That's not shit that makes sense. So it's a spell specifically talking about when people get lost in their feelings, get lost in their desires, and their feelings convince their left brain to carry out that logic, that form of order that doesn't normally make sense, type of shit. So it's like all this shit. It's just spell work right in front of you. But it's like they're not gonna tell you that's what it is, right? Like a feminine aspect is like the moon, and shit like that, right? Uh, and a woman is like a representation, a walking moon and stuff like that, right? And a sun is like masculine individuality, and you can look at that as a man. So it's like they're not gonna tell you what those things mean behind closed doors. They're just gonna get you lost in the objective forms of these things. They're gonna tell you like, man, it's stupid. Because think about it, when you draw a demon and this demon is red, you're just talking about anger. You're just talking about a feeling that someone had. You can make it spooky, tell people, oh, that shit came from outside of you. And see, it can be like that too. But at the same time, though, you don't want to get lost in the bias, get too right brain, become delusional without the objectivity. That's why balance is so important, because people get lost in these different natures that make them unbalanced, and it create an unbalanced circumstance situation and shit like that, right? So that's all it be. It's just objective forms that we make up based upon subjective mysticism, because everything is based on subjectivity at the end of the day, right? So it's just, but that's what make a person unique. Real fucking shit. And that's a part of life, right? Subjectivity is nighttime. What's going on in your internal realm? Objectivity is the light, the external. What's going on in daytime? So these things has an as above, so below relationships. So let's not fucking get lost in how we present these things. Let's just understand that, okay, We just have different forms of presenting these things. And if we just get into that, then there'll be no more religious wars, no more religious arguments online. But man, look how many people got killed back in the day just for a religion, just for the name of their god and shit like that. That they don't know. It's just an energy, a seasonal transitions. That literally shit that we all see every day. But motherfuckers got lost in the objectivity of it, and that's just being lost in a half truth, not knowing the full truth about what you're actually observing and giving your awareness and energy to as a machine. Where it's like just being the occultist behind closed doors kind of give them the advantage because they know how to get people lost in psychology and shit like that, and get people lost in themselves and their own internal world. So they know how to present you with an external form of lostness. Let's say, for example, like I said earlier, a person can be lost in the energy of love or cater to the energy of love. You can be a Libra, Pisces type of shit, and you get lost in that in love and shit like that. If I make a religion for love, you're obviously gonna jump into it because that's what you're already doing inside of you, right? You can be a Saturn sign, where let's say you're a Capricorn, Aquarius, or an Earth sign, a practical sign. I'm gonna give you a practical religion about catering to the left brain, and that's all it is. But when a person can make a balanced form of that and tell you where they made that content, that catalog, and shit like that, man, that'd be a dope person. But we don't got no people like that. We don't got no people like that. But that's the thing, man. It's just language, and people get lost in that shit. But yeah. Because think about it, the world would be a way better place if we all knew this shit. If we all just, if these goddamn Masons and Jews shared this shit, but the shadow government don't give a fuck about people. They're like, you just give us your energy, just give us your soul, because they're trying to like get born in like the sixth dimension type of shit. So it's like they keep you here as a slave, make you use their energy for them, and then you barely get a breadcrumb. You can go to work, barely get paid. You can pray 1,000 times a day, but you might not get much if you don't know how to pray. Because praying is just about resonating with energy. If you know what you're resonating with, that's what you're going to manifest. If you're happy all the time, depending on what you want to do with your space and your spirit, you're going to manifest some happy circumstance situation or a person that's in that space, a partner or some shit like that, right? Because the universe is just giving you whatever space you in. Now think about it. If you're a religious person, you're just asking for something outside of you to give you something all the time. That's just the space of being needy. And if you're resonating with being needy, then that's what you're going to manifest. More thoughts and feelings about being needy, feelings of lack, circumstances in a situation where you need shit outside of you, donations and shit like that, right? Shit like that. High key, to be honest, I think that's why. I mean, actually, no, never mind. That depends on the person bias. I was gonna say some shit like that's why some people be lost in like. Actually, no, it's not even a good example. Never mind. Fuck that shit. Because it just really depends on the individual. But yeah, I think that's all for today, man. Um, that's all I have for today. We'll see y'all tomorrow if I go live. If I go live in downtown, we're gonna see what's gonna happen. And yeah, that was just some talk on the religious, esoteric nature of things as not to get lost. All right, everybody. I mean, shit. Yeah, all right, everybody. Peace out. Real shit.